My name is Michael Meacher. I'm a member of the UK Parliament, and I was Minister for the Environment in the Blair government from 1997 to 2003. Well, the view that it is a war on terror, in my view, does not best fit the facts. You have to consider what happened before 9/11, at 9/11 and afterwards. Before 9/11, the US administration received a great deal of information that an attack was coming. First of all, there were 11 countries, including the UK, which gave their intelligence to the US authorities to that effect. Mossad sent 2 experts in August 2001, 1 month before 9/11, to the States with a list of 200 Islamic suspects, 4 of whom turned out to be the hijackers. None of them were arrested. There was evidence which came from Zacharias Moussaoui, who was arrested. He was the 20th hijacker, most people think he was. He was arrested, and the FBI agent wanted to investigate his computer, which we now know contained some clues as to 9/11, but the information came through from the top levels of the FBI that they didn't want any arrests. There were evidence with regard to the issuing of visas. Several of the hijackers obtained visas in Saudi Arabia. Michael Springman, who was the head of the US Visa Bureau in Jeddah, said that the CIA had been illicitly offering visas since 1987 to Islamic warriors to go to the States to receive training in terrorism to be used against the Russians in the Afghan war. When the Afghan war was over in the early 1990s, that practice apparently continued, and persons who were being used for militant purposes on behalf of the US around the globe were still allowed into the United States. There is a great deal of evidence that was not followed up. In 1996, it was known that airplanes might be used to attack buildings in Washington or New York. In 1999, the US National Intelligence Council produced its own report suggesting that Al-Qaeda suicide bombers could use planes to attack either the CIA headquarters or the Pentagon or the White House. We also know that in the President's daily briefing, the highest level of intelligence given daily to the United States, on the 6th of August 2001, 1 month before 9/11, Condoleezza Rice had produced information about the possibilities of a hijacking, which could be related to the Intelligence Council's report. So there was a very great deal of evidence, and it seems to me extraordinary that the United States, with its stupendous military capabilities and the most technologically advanced country in the world, completely and totally failed to follow up these leads. I think another explanation fits the facts better. On the day itself, the first hijack occurred latest about 8:20 a.m. For the next hour and 40 minutes, no aircraft was put into the air, even though there was at the US Andrews Air Force Base 10 miles from Washington, D.C., a flight of F-16, a whole squadron of top-level fighters. No planes were flown in from other air bases, even though at top speed they were certainly within range. Why did that happen? We know that where an aircraft goes on course, it is a legal requirement that aircraft are put into the air to check on the position and purpose of commercial aircraft. Why on this single day did it not happen? In the previous 9 months it had happened 67 times. It was a routine procedure. Why did this not happen on that very important day? That question has never been answered. If you look at what happened after 9/11, when they immediately suspected it was bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, there were several opportunities to catch him. The 2 Pakistani parties, the leading Islamist parties, offered to extradite bin Laden. That was never accepted. We were told by a key US official that to narrow our operations would put at risk the premature collapse of an international effort. What did he mean by that? That suggests that they had a wider brief than simply to catch bin Laden. Richard Myers, who was the US chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the US, said that the objective had never been to catch bin Laden. What an astonishing statement to make. One wonders what the objective was, and I think we now have a much better idea. There were several times, I think 10 times, when US air commanders complained that they had Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders in their sights, but they couldn't get permission to shoot, and when the permission came, it was too late. Now, this is really extraordinary, and I think a much better explanation than the war on terror, which I think is bogus, is given by the Project for the New America Century document. That was written in September 2000, just before or in the course of the US presidential election, which brought George Bush to power. It was written by a neoconservative think tank. It was called Strengthening America's Defenses. And what it says, I think, gives a much better explanation of what happened before 9/11, of why 9/11 was such a disaster, and why after 9/11 the US was so slow to go after either Al-Qaeda or bin Laden, or didn't seriously try to do so. And that explanation is that what the Project for the New America Century document says is several things which are really chilling. First of all, that there is a need for continuing substantial American bases in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and whatever happened to Saddam Hussein, there was a need for a substantial American force presence, even if he left the scene in the Middle East. Exactly what later happened in the war on Iraq. It talks about the need for more American forces in Southeast Asia as a check on China. We've seen some evidence of that. It talks about American space forces to dominate space. It talks about total American control of cyberspace so that no one can use the internet against America. It talks about peacekeeping missions which should be led by American political leadership, not by the UN. That's exactly what has happened. We see Wolfowitz, one of the neoconservative leaders, and Libby, who was the chief of staff for Cheney, saying that it was important that America exerts its leadership and that it prevents any alternative countries, by which presumably is meant the EU or Japan, from challenging that leadership, or indeed from even seeking some regional position within the world. This is really chilling, and perhaps most significantly of all, it talks about the possibility of developing biological weapons in order to shift biological welfare, in order to shift biological warfare away from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. Now, when you add all of this together, I think it is perfectly clear that that is a blueprint for US world domination. We know from Paul O'Neill, the first Treasury to the Cabinet, that from the first days of the Bush administration they were talking about the attack on Iraq. It was not a question of whether, it was a question of how, with the President saying, "Go tell me how to do it." They were planning this before the 2000 US presidential election, and all they needed was a trigger to put it in place, and that is what 9/11 provided them with. I think that 9/11 provided the trigger to enable the US administration under George Bush to put in place a geopolitical strategy to seek American control across the world.